Nora Bellingham had worn her best dress for a man who never showed up. Not her best dress in the way people say it casually. She meant the navy one with the structured waist that she'd driven 40 minutes to buy in a different size at a different mall because the one near her apartment had stopped carrying her size 2 years ago. And she hadn't wanted to order online and risk the wrong shade of blue. She'd picked it up on a Tuesday, tried it on in a dressing room under fluorescent light, and decided that yes, if she was going to do this whole dating thing again, she was going to do it right. She'd hung it on the back of her bathroom door for 3 weeks. She'd steamed it the morning. She'd worn shoes that pinched slightly at the toes, and told herself she'd get used to them by the time she arrived at Alderton's. That was at 6:45. By 9:15, she was still sitting at table 14, and her shoes had stopped pinching because her feet had gone partially numb. The waiter, a young man named Theo with patient eyes and the practiced expression of someone who'd seen this before, had refreshed her water glass 5 times without being asked. She appreciated that more than she could say. The bread basket had come and gone. The amuse-bouche had been cleared. The couple 2 tables over who'd arrived after her had already paid their bill and left, laughing about something, their coats brushing together as they walked out into the Chicago wind. Nora had watched them go with a very specific kind of feeling in her chest. Not quite envy, not quite grief. Something quieter and more embarrassing than either. She picked up her phone. No messages. She'd stopped texting Brandon Kessler after the first hour. Her last message sat there in the conversation like a small grey stone. "Hey, just checking in. Still on for tonight?" 2 blue checks. Read at 7:23 p.m. It was now 9:18. She thought about all the things she hadn't done that afternoon. She'd skipped the gym because she hadn't wanted to be tired. She'd turned down Priya's invitation to her cousin's birthday thing because she'd told herself she had plans. She'd eaten nothing but a protein bar and half a coffee at her desk because she'd wanted to actually be hungry for dinner, actually appreciate it, actually feel like she was present in her own life for once, instead of just passing through it. She'd been stood up. She, Nora Bellingham, 31 years old, senior forensic accountant at Merrick & Lowe, who had once correctly identified a $14 million shell company discrepancy in a tax filing that every other auditor had missed. She had sat in a restaurant in a dress she'd driven 40 minutes to buy, and waited 2 hours and 33 minutes for a man named Brandon Kessler, who had read her message at 7:23 and apparently decided that was enough. The anger came then. Not the sad kind, the clean kind, the kind that had edges. She reached for her clutch. "Leaving so soon?" The voice came from her left, and it was not Theo, the waiter's voice. It was lower than that, quieter. The kind of quiet that didn't need to compete with the ambient noise of a restaurant, because it somehow cut through it anyway. The way a particular frequency of sound can rattle glass without ever seeming loud. Nora looked up. The man standing at the edge of her table was not someone she recognized, but she registered him the way you register sudden weather. Instinctively, with a kind of full-body recalibration. He was tall in the way that required you to actually adjust your gaze upward. Dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open just enough to suggest he'd arrived from somewhere more serious than here. His hair was dark and cropped close at the sides. He had the kind of jaw that people described in books and she'd always assumed was artistic license. He was also, she noticed with the detached precision that served her well in audit rooms, accompanied by 3 men in similar suits who had positioned themselves near the restaurant's 2 exits with the unconscious ease of people accustomed to positioning themselves near exits. "I'm sorry," she said. "You were reaching for your bag." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking. "I'm suggesting you wait." Nora blinked. "You're suggesting I don't know you, Rowan Blackwell." He said it the way people said words that had weight. Not with pride, exactly, but with the quiet assumption that the name would land. "And you're Nora Bellingham. You work at Merrick and Lowe. You've been here since 6:45. You ordered still water and a glass of the Barolo that you haven't touched, and whoever was supposed to meet you didn't." The anger was still there, but it had shifted, re-aimed itself. "Why do you know who I am?" "Because Brandon Kessler is a person of significant interest to me," Rowan Blackwell said. "And because you are, apparently, the last person he agreed to meet before he stopped being findable." Nora felt the blood cool slightly in her hands. She'd spent 11 years in forensic accounting. She understood the precise meaning of words like findable when used in a particular register. "What do you mean, stopped being findable?" "I mean," he said, "that as of approximately 7 this evening, Mr. Kessler is no longer answering calls from anyone." Which is interesting, particularly given what we've been looking for in his financial records for the past 4 months. Silence. Across the restaurant, someone laughed. The sound seemed to come from very far away. "You've been auditing him," Nora said. It wasn't a question. Something shifted in Rowan Blackwell's expression. Barely, just a fraction, the way the surface of deep water moves when something passes beneath it. In a manner of speaking, what does that mean? "It means," he said, "that the kind of audit we conduct doesn't involve the IRS." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the men by the doors. She looked at her untouched glass of Barolo, which suddenly seemed like the most irrelevant object in the room. "I'd like to leave," she said. "I know." He folded his hands on the table. His hands were large and unhurried and bore the kind of stillness that told her he was accustomed to rooms where his stillness meant something. "And you will, but first I need to ask you something, and I need you to be very honest with me, because I am very good at knowing when people aren't." She didn't move. She was calculating, the way she always calculated. Risk, probability, exit strategies. There were 3 large men near the exits. The restaurant was occupied. Theo the waiter was watching from the far side of the room with an expression that had stopped being patient and become something more carefully neutral. The front windows faced the street, lit, occupied Chicago Street. If she screamed, someone would hear. She didn't scream. She put her clutch back on the table. "Fine," she said. "Ask, you reviewed the Carver-Donnell portfolio last spring, the municipal bond restructuring." She went very still. "That's confidential client work. I know what it is. I'm asking if you reviewed it. Why?" "Because 4 weeks after that review, your firm's lead partner on the account, a man named Dennis Hoole, quietly settled a malpractice complaint that had been filed against him with a payment we've traced back to an account Brandon Kessler controls. And 2 weeks after that settlement, the Carver-Donnell audit notes were amended. The version currently on file does not match the version you submitted." Nora said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when her brain was moving very fast. She had reviewed the Carver-Donnell portfolio. She had flagged 3 discrepancies in the bond restructuring. Anomalies that didn't rise to the level of certainty she needed to escalate formally, but that she documented carefully in her working notes and attached as a rider to her submission. Standard practice. The kind of careful, defensive paperwork she always did because she'd learned early that, in this business, the paper trail was the only thing that told the truth when everyone else stopped. She had never seen the amended version. She had not known there was an amended version. "The rider I attached," she said slowly. "Was it in the amended notes?" Rowan Blackwell looked at her with a focus that felt almost physical. "No. Then someone removed it." "Yes, and replaced my findings with a clean report. No anomalies noted." Nora sat with that for a moment. She thought about the Carver-Donnell file. She thought about Dennis Hoole, who had the warmth of a very expensive leather chair and the ethical backbone of one. She thought about the malpractice settlement Rowan Blackwell had just described, paid out of an account Brandon Kessler controlled, which meant Brandon Kessler had known about her findings, had known they were a problem, and had apparently decided that the most efficient solution was to take her to dinner and… What? Charm her? Buy her silence? Find out what she remembered? She thought about the dress she'd bought at a mall 40 minutes away. She thought about the protein bar she'd eaten instead of lunch. She thought about sitting here for 2 hours and 33 minutes, telling herself she just needed to give him a little more time. He wasn't late, she said. No, he was never coming. This was. She stopped. She could feel the shape of it now. He needed to know if I still had my original notes, whether I'd kept copies. That's our assessment. Yes. And when I texted him at 7, he read it and decided he'd learned what he needed to learn. She looked at Rowan Blackwell steadily. What does he think I know that makes this necessary? The 3 anomalies you flagged, Rowan Blackwell said, are, when seen together with a set of transactions your working notes didn't have access to, evidence of a tax shelter structure built to launder approximately $62 million in proceeds from 3 specific entities. 2 of those entities are connected to municipal contracts. 1 is connected to us. Use, she noted the word. So, he needed to know if I had the pieces that completed the picture, Nora said, and whether you'd shared them with anyone. Have I been in danger tonight? She asked it the way she'd ask a client about an undisclosed liability, directly, without flinching, because flinching was a waste of everyone's time. Rowan Blackwell was quiet for a beat. Brandon Kessler is not a man who tends toward direct action. He prefers financial solutions. But the people whose money he's been managing do not share that preference. And they've become aware that there is a loose end. Me! You! Nora looked down at her clutch. She looked at her wine glass. She thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was much less afraid than she probably should have been, and that this was likely because anger was still crowding most of the available space. I have the original notes, she said. I have everything. I keep copies of every working file I submit, encrypted, off-site, with 2 people I trust outside the firm. It's a habit I developed years ago because I have never, not once in 11 years, trusted the archive systems of the firms I've worked for. She met his eyes. I'm telling you this not because you asked, but because I want you to understand that the thing they think they're looking for has already been duplicated in 4 places, and destroying me would not destroy it. Rowan Blackwell looked at her for a long moment. How long have you been doing that? He asked. The backups. Since the first firm I worked for lost an entire filing system in a server migration and blamed it on the junior associate who'd actually submitted everything correctly. That was me. Something moved across his face that might, in a different light, have been the very beginning of a smile. It didn't fully arrive. But it was there. Mr. Blackwell, she said, I don't know what you are or what you do, and I suspect that if I did, I might feel differently about this conversation. But right now I have a straightforward professional problem, which is that someone removed my findings from a client file, and my name is still attached to that file, which means that when this becomes a legal matter, and it will become a legal matter, I am the most visible person without clean hands unless I can establish that my original submission was altered. I know. So I would like to propose something. He waited. You tell me what you actually need from my notes. I look at what I have against what you've described. If my documentation supports your case, we discuss how I provide it in a way that also protects me professionally and legally. You don't require me to do anything that requires me to trust you completely, because I don't trust anyone completely, and you give me the name of a lawyer I can call tomorrow morning to advise me on the appropriate structure for whatever this turns into. Silence. Outside the restaurant windows, a taxi swept past in the wet November dark, its lights trailing orange on the pavement. You're not frightened, Rowan Blackwell said. It wasn't entirely a statement. There was a question underneath it. I'm quite frightened, Nora said. I'm just better at working when I'm frightened than when I'm not. He leaned back slightly in his chair. It was the first time he'd moved since sitting down, and the movement had a quality of deliberateness, like a man who'd spent a long time learning to control the space he occupied. The lawyer's name is Miriam Voss. She's the best in the city for this kind of matter, and she already knows my name, which will save time. Does she know your name because she represents you, or because she's represented people you've come into conflict with? Both. Fine. Nora reached for her wine glass, and finally took a sip. It was very good. She'd made an excellent choice, considering everything. Tell me about the three entities, he told her. She listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, processing each piece against the framework she was building in the back of her mind, noting which numbers she recognized and which she didn't, filing each new detail precisely. He spoke for 14 minutes. She did not take notes because she didn't need to, and also because she suspected this was not the kind of conversation for which you left a paper trail in a restaurant. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The second entity, she said, the one with the municipal contracts. I flagged an anomaly in a disbursement pattern on the Carver-Donnell file that I thought, at the time, was just irregular. The timing of quarterly distributions didn't match the contract dates by about 11 days consistently. Every quarter, like someone was buffering the money through a holding period. Yes, that's in my notes. We know. That 11-day buffer. She paused. That's not just a disbursement irregularity. That's a float. You run money through a float account long enough, and you can wash the source attribution. Yes, you already knew that. We suspected it. Your documentation establishes the pattern consistently over 6 quarters. It makes it provable. Nora set her glass down. The restaurant had quieted around them. Not empty, but stilled, the way restaurants get when the hour has shifted from dinner into the tail end of the night. The lingering tables nursing last drinks, the kitchen beginning its close. Theo the waiter was still in his position across the room. He'd stopped pretending to do other things. What happens to Brandon Kessler? She asked. Rowan Blackwell looked at her with an expression that was careful in the way of a man who'd learned to be careful with his expressions because the wrong one at the wrong time had consequences. That depends on several things. Several things including whether the people whose money he's been managing decide he's more useful as a witness or a liability, among other factors. I'd like him to be a witness, Nora said, in an actual courtroom, in front of an actual jury. I'd like the record to show that he sat in this restaurant at 7:23, read my text message, and decided that was sufficient. I'd like that to be in the record. She paused. I'm not interested in anything happening to him that keeps him out of a courtroom. Rowan Blackwell was quiet. I'm telling you this, she said, because I suspect you have options available to you that don't involve courtrooms, and I'm asking you to set them aside for this one. You're asking me, he said slowly, to do something the legal way. I'm asking you to let the legal process do the part of this that the legal process is good at. I'll give you the documentation you need. You give me the protection I need while this is active. We use Miriam Voss to structure the disclosure correctly. And Brandon Kessler ends up in a situation where the only path forward for him is cooperation with federal investigators, which is where men like Brandon Kessler always end up eventually anyway. Another silence. Longer this time. You've thought about this quickly, he said. I've been thinking about Carver-Donnell since March, she's said. I just didn't know what I was thinking about until 11 minutes ago. Outside by, the rain had started again. She could see it on the restaurant's front windows, light breaking against water, the city reduced to streaks of orange and white. Rowan Blackwell reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card. He set it on the table, not slid it, set it, with a deliberateness that made the gesture feel like something other than a business exchange. My direct line. Not an assistant, if anything happens. Anything that feels wrong, a car that appears twice A call from an unknown number. Anyone who asks about your work in a way that's slightly off, you call that number. Nora looked at the card. No logo. Just a number, and below it, in small, clean type, Blackwell. She picked it up. She put it in her clutch, next to the phone that still had Brandon Kessler's red receipt, sitting in it like a small accusation. "I'm going to go home," she said. "I'm going to eat something. I haven't eaten since a protein bar at 2 o'clock. And then I'm going to go through my archive and pull everything related to Carver Donnell and organize it into a format that's usable." She pushed back from the table. "I'll call Miriam Voss in the morning." She stood. She was shorter than she'd felt sitting down. He rose when she did, not with ceremony, but with the automatic reflex of someone for whom certain things were not optional. And he was upright, considerably taller than the table had allowed for. And she thought for a moment about the full logistics of how this evening had begun versus where it had arrived. "Monsieur Bellingham," he said. She stopped. "The driver outside, the black Suburban on the left side of the entrance, will take you wherever you need to go tonight and will remain within reach for the next several weeks. His name is Pell. He doesn't make conversation unless you start it." She considered pointing out that she hadn't agreed to this. She considered explaining that accepting a driver from a man who'd just told her she was a loose end in a $62 million laundering operation was not the behavior of someone with sound professional judgment. She considered the rain on the windows and Brandon Kessler's red receipt and the 11-day float in the Carver Donnell distribution data that she'd flagged on a Tuesday in March and then spent 8 months second-guessing herself about. "Tell Pell I need to stop at the Thai place on Randolph," she said. "They have good takeout. I'll be in the car in 5 minutes." She walked to the coat check. She collected her coat. Black wool. Sensible. The coat of a person who lived in Chicago and had made peace with it. And she shrugged it on and buttoned it and tied the belt. And she was doing this when she became aware that Rowan Blackwell was still watching her from across the room, still with that expression she couldn't fully name, still with that quality of absolute stillness that she suspected he wore the way she wore sensible coats. She did not turn back. She pushed through the door of Alderton's, and the November wind caught her, and somewhere a car moved, and the city was wet and bright and indifferent, and she had 11 years of careful documentation in an encrypted off-site archive. And someone had tried very hard tonight to find out what she knew. They'd chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. The weeks that followed moved differently from the weeks before. Pell did not make conversation, which she appreciated. He drove well and parked efficiently, and when she came down from her building, in the mornings he was always already there, the Suburban idling, a coffee in the cup holder that was the right size and had no sugar, which she had not told him and didn't ask about. She decided not to examine it too closely. She had more important things to examine. Miriam Voss was 61 years old, had wire-framed glasses and the conversational energy of someone who'd been winning arguments since before Nora was born, and took approximately 8 minutes to understand the full picture of the Carver Donnell situation before saying, with clinical satisfaction, "This is a very good case," which, coming from Miriam Voss, Nora understood to mean something more than the words themselves. She provided her documentation, all of it, the original working notes, the rider, the 6 quarters of distribution data, the time-stamped submission records that proved what she'd filed and when. Miriam organized it. Miriam had conversations with people Nora was not privy to. Miriam called her on a Thursday morning 11 days in and said, "The U.S. Attorney's Office is interested. Very interested. You will need to be available for a preliminary meeting on Friday." Brandon Kessler was arrested on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the night at Alderton's. Nora read about it on her phone on the subway, in a 6-paragraph article in the Tribune that described him as a financial advisor with suspected ties to organized crime, and noted that he was cooperating with investigators. She read the article twice. She put her phone away. She thought about the Reed receipt. She thought about the dress she'd bought 40 minutes from home, that she'd worn for a man who'd decided she wasn't worth showing up for. She thought about the fact that her documentation, her careful, precise, obsessive habit of keeping copies of every working file she'd ever submitted, was the thing that had made $62 million traceable. She thought, I am very good at my job. She thought, I have always been very good at my job. The call came on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after Brandon Kessler's arrest. Not Rowan Blackwell's number, a different one, which she would not have answered except that the text that preceded it said only, It's Blackwell, different line. 1 minute, she answered. The individuals whose funds were at issue, he said without preamble, have been informed of the full situation, including your role in it. They've also been informed that the documentation which precipitated the investigation was held in multiple secure locations, and that its relevance has already been provided to the appropriate authorities, which means any action against you at this point would produce no strategic benefit and significant strategic liability. She understood what this meant. They're leaving me alone. They're leaving you alone. She was sitting at her kitchen table. She had takeout from the Thai place on Randolph. She had a glass of wine, a different Barolo, not as expensive as Alderton's, but she'd made her peace with that. And Kessler is speaking at length and at volume to anyone who will listen. He will continue to do so, because the alternative available to him is considerably less pleasant than speaking to federal investigator. She meant it, cleanly and without complication. She wanted him in a courtroom. She wanted the record. A pause. You did well, Rowan Blackwell said. It was not a thing she'd have expected him to say, and she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. I did my job, she said. Yes. Another pause. There's something else. She waited. Dennis Hoole has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review at Merrick and Lowe. The Bar Association has been notified. The complaint that was settled in his favor has been reopened in light of new information. She absorbed this. Dennis Hoole, who had the warmth of a very expensive leather chair. Dennis Hoole, who had accepted a settlement and let her working notes be erased. Thank you. Don't thank me. Your documentation did that. I had nothing to do with it. You're being generous, sir. I'm being accurate. A brief pause, and then, are you free on Saturday? The question arrived without preamble or context, which she supposed was consistent with everything else about this man. For what? She asked. I have a dinner. Not at Alderton's. Somewhere considerably less dramatic. He said it with a dryness she wouldn't have predicted from the man who'd sat across from her in a dark suit, and told her she was a loose end in a money laundering operation. I find I'd like company that isn't paid to be there. Nora looked at her glass of wine. She thought about a great many things in a relatively short span of time. She thought about a Tuesday in March, and a flag she'd almost not included, because she'd second-guessed herself. She thought about 11 days, and 11 years, and a dress that was still hanging in her closet unworn, except for the evening it hadn't mattered at all. Tell me the restaurant, she said. It's called Marlowe's. On the north side. They have a very good wine program. I'll look at the list ahead of time. I'd expect nothing less. She almost smiled. Saturday, she said. 7 o'clock. I'll have Pell. I'll drive myself, she said. I know where Marlowe's is. A pause. Then, of course, she hung up. She took a long sip of her Barolo. Outside her kitchen window, Chicago was doing the thing it always did in November. Cold, lit, relentless, beautiful in the specific way of cities that don't ask your permission to be what they are. She thought, I have always known what I'm worth. She thought, it just took the right night for everyone else to catch up. She finished her wine. She cleaned up her takeout containers. She took the navy dress from her closet, turned it in her hands, and hung it back up. Not because she wouldn't wear it, but because she was going to need a different dress for Saturday. and she had exactly one idea of what it might look like. And there was a mall 40 minutes from here that still carried her size. She was already planning the route.